Hello everybody. So welcome back. So in the previous section I have dealt with your uh, complement proteins, and then we talked about. So now let's talk today about different blood cells, because your entire immunity is dependent on your blood cell. Okay, so especially your white blood cells, isn't it? So little bit I will talk about today in this video about blood cells, and then in the next video I will link it with your natural killer cells and your interferons, which is also left in your innate immunity. Okay, so we have talked about inflammation, complement proteins and all those. Those two are left, so I will talk in that in the next video, because it is the video which is will link with that. Okay, so moving on with the topic. So as you people know very well about blood cells, isn't it? So if I talk about blood, so I won't mainly talk too much about blood. In some video I will make and tell you about entirely about blood. So you know that it is made up of plasma, which is around 60%, 55 to 60% you can say, and your blood cells. Okay, so which is around 45 to 40%, which you can say. Now if you talk about these blood cells, so there are basically two kind of blood cells. What are they? They are your red blood cells. We also call them as RBCs, and if you talk about them, we call them as erythrocytes, but they're red in color. Okay, and then we have got WBCs, or white blood cells. We call them as what? Leukocytes. And mostly with immunity. In immunity, we are basically concerned with what? We are concerned with these leukocytes. Okay, so mostly I will talk about leukocytes today. Okay, and I hope you people know that you increase if whenever an infection occurs, there is increase in your leukocytes. Okay, and that increase in leukocytes is called as what? Anybody knows? It is known as leukocytosis. And if there is decrease in this number of leukocytes, we call it as leukopenia. So whenever the word penia comes, remember that it is decreasing the amount, and whenever the word leukocytosis means it's increasing. Okay, so this is something very basic. And RBC, you know that it is biconcave disc shaped structure, isn't it? And in some video I will talk about this biconcave disc shaped structure. Okay, then we say biconcave disc shaped structure, so I will talk about it. But today my major focus is on your what? WBCs. So let's move on to WBC, isn't it? And in that video we'll talk about plasma and all everything. Now moving on to your leukocytes. You know that leukocytes are of two types. What are they? Leukocytes. They are agranulocytes and granulocytes. So first granulocytes. And the another part is agranulocytes. So firstly I will talk about granulocytes. And now if you look at granulocytes, basically they are of three types, isn't it? What are they? First one is your basophil. What is it? Basophil. Now if you see, if I draw for you basophils, now suppose this is your basophil cell, and it has got nucleus inside it, just joined by a strand, and they have got what? They have got large vesicles in them. See, they are called granulocytes. Under light microscopy, these vesicles appeared granular. But now with the advent of your microscopy, electron microscopy, we see that they have got these vesicles, and they are filled with fluid. Okay. Now basophil, and these basophils, as you know, when they migrate to tissues, we call them as what? We call them as mast cells. And these, they release what? Histamine, which is your vasodilator. Okay, or you can say it is an inflammatory mediator. Okay, now the next granulocyte which we are going to talk about is your what? Neutrophil. Now this neutrophil, basically what will happen with this neutrophil, if you look, let me make it structure first. So if you look at a neutrophil, it is what? It is a polymorphonuclear structure it has got. So if you look at it, it has got many nucleated, it is around 3 to 4 nucleuses there, and here yes, the granules are there, but very small granules are there. Okay, these granules are vesicles. Okay, now you know that their role is what? They are what? Whenever infection increases, they migrate to that area and they cause what? I hope you remember, they are responsible for what? Phagocytosis. Phagocytosis. Okay, so they are responsible for that. Now nextly we are coming towards the next one, which is your eosinophil. Eosinophil. Okay, now this eosinophil also looks quite much similar to your basophil, but the difference is that they also appear quite, and the bigger strand is there which is connecting them. Okay, and it's very literally difficult to distinguish between the two. And if you look at, but here if you look at, they have got what? Smaller. Now the vesicles in them are bit medium sized. This is larger, this is smaller, and this one is medium sized. So accordingly you have to make diagram. So medium sized vesicles are there, and this is your eosinophil. Now what basically happens in eosinophil? Like you must have heard of a condition called as eosinophilia. Now you got it, that there is an increase in eosinophil count, then we call it as eosinophilia. And many people are suffering from it, and in them what is happening, you can see it increases when there, in case of allergy is there, or there is what? Chronic inflammation. If inflammation is becoming what? Chronic, then we find that increases. Okay, and the last is in your parasitic infection, like worms and all, when increases in body, and then you find them eosinophil count will increase. Okay, so this is about your granulocytes, that in granulocytes there are basophil, neutrophil and eosinophil. Similarly, like increase in neutrophil count you will call as neutrophilia, decrease neutropenia, okay, basopenia, like that. Okay, so now moving on to, we will now move to agranulocytes. Okay, so agranulocytes. Now you basically know that agranulocytes, um, you must have heard of the one blood also, that is thrombocytes, are also a type of agranulocytes. We also call them commonly as what? We call them as blood platelets. And you know that their major function, they are involved in blood coagulation or clot formation. Okay, so moving on to the next blood that is present is agranulocytes, is your what? Is your monocytes. What is it? Monocytes. Now you remember, if monocytes, they are cells, okay, with what? No, they are a cell with kidney shaped nucleus. Okay, so they have got a kidney shaped nucleus in them. Okay, if you look at them, they have got a kidney shaped nucleus, and they also have got, okay, so they, when these cells, they migrate to tissues. Okay, when these cells, they migrate to tissues, okay, in tissues, what do we call them? If you remember, I've told in previous video, we call them as what? Macrophages. So they change their name and they become what? Macrophages. And they know, you know their function. They are what? They are phagocytic. Whether it is monocyte in blood or your macrophages, they are all what? Phagocytic. Okay. Now moving on to that, these monocytes also give rise to another kind of cells, which we call them as dendritic cells. Why do we call them as dendritic? Like if you look at dendrites, they have no structure like that, therefore we are calling them as dendritic cells. Okay, see, these cells are also when these cells you can find in lymph nodes also, in tissue spaces also. And these cells, what they do, they are also called as what? They are called as dendritic cells, or we also call them as, what? Dendritic cells. Dendritic cells, or we call them as antigen presenting cells. So what they do, they basically now flag on their cells, what they will do, they will flag on their cells your antigens. Okay, they will flag on their surface these antigens on them, so that can be recognized by your B cells. Okay, so what they do basically, they act as a link, you can say they act as a link between what? Innate and active immunity. Innate and acquired immunity or active immunity. Okay, so they act as a link. Now these are your also your monocytes, which has now changed to, modified themselves to, or differentiated themselves to your dendritic cells. Now the third category of cells that come under your agranulocytes are your what? Lymphocytes. Now if you look at these lymphocytes, okay, now these lymphocytes basically, there are basically, if you look at these lymphocytes, there are under two categories. What are they? They are your large and small lymphocytes. So basically we will talk about large and small lymphocytes. So if you look at lymphocytes, there is what? It will be large, or you can say big cells, or small cells, or small lymphocytes. And now basically these large lymphocytes will give rise to what? You natural killer cells. Now you want to know why I'm talking about it. Natural killer cells. And if you look at these cells, if you look at these cells are large in size and they have a nucleus in them, okay, and they have got vacuoles. Okay, now earlier they were called agranulocytes under light microscopy, okay, when they were not visible, but now we know that they have got vesicles in them, and these vesicles, they contain certain components in them. Okay, so we will, in the next video you will come to know what do they contain and how do they work. Okay, so these are your natural killer cells, which are your large lymphocytes. Okay, now there are small lymphocytes. If I have to make small lymphocytes, so this is your small lymphocyte, and basically the major portion of the small lymphocyte is what is occupied by your nucleus. Okay, so if you talk about them, so this is your small lymphocyte. Okay, and now these small lymphocytes, they now later on they give rise to your two kind of cells. What are they? They are your B cells, B lymphocytes, and your T lymphocytes. What do we call? T cells, or what do we call them as? T lymphocytes. Okay, now these B lymphocytes, they mature where? In your bone marrow. They mature where? In your bone marrow. And your T lymphocytes mature where? In thymus. Now, when these B cells mature, but when they get differentiated, I will tell you about that process also later. When they get differentiated, they change themselves, okay, from that pool of B lymphocytes, the one which will recognize the antigen, they will differentiate themselves in your lymph nodes and all there, and there they will give rise to another kind of cell which is called as what? Plasma cells. What do we call them as? We call them as plasma cells, and these cells are very rich in what? Your endoplasmic reticulum. They are very rich in that endoplasmic reticulum. Why? Because they will secrete what? Lot of what? Proteins. So they need to have filled with endoplasmic reticulum. So basically they secrete what? A lot of antibodies, Y-shaped molecule which we call as antibodies. So plasma cells are the cells which secrete antibodies. So a quick recap if I do, then your white blood cells, we call them as leukocytes. We divided them into granulocytes and agranulocytes. Granulocytes were basophil, eosinophil and neutrophil, and agranulocytes are your thrombocytes, monocytes. Monocytes differentiate into macrophages and dendritic cells, and lymphocytes, they are large and small. Large lymphocyte gives rise to natural killer cells, and your small lymphocytes gives rise to B and T cells. Okay, and B cells differentiates and give rise to your what? Plasma cells. Okay, so with this I would like to stop. If you have any query, you can write in the comment section, and thanks for watching the video.